Hello there. I've been asked to look at the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. Now, that's a long title for what we're really dealing with here. So I'm going to get straight to the point. 2 words: surveillance state. Here's 3 more with bells on. Like George Orwell's 1984, this bill gives us a glimpse of a dystopian world where the government undermines our rights and our autonomy and snoops on us like never before. A constant surveillance system that is used to discipline those of us who dissent from the official narrative, question governments, and is also used to continue molding our minds so that we become more agreeable to the overarching agendas that are never for the good of us. In 1984, it was the party. In this case, it is the Conservative Party who are in government. But you can be assured it would almost certainly be any of them. Because what we know is not only do we not have a democracy, for example, the last few prime ministers were not voted in by we, the people. There is no opposition party. Sir Keir Starmer, who leads the Labour Party, is not it, and could never be serious opposition. And certainly the Labour Party, to all intents and purposes, appear to be very supportive of this bill. So the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, or DPDI for short, has been on the table for a while. They'd hoped to get it through during Liz Truss's brief 49-day tenure as Prime Minister in September 2022, but that failed. Then it was hoped they could introduce it in spring 2023. Again, that failed. A further plan was for autumn 2023, but again, that has not been achieved. So what next? Well, now I'm told by data protection experts that the hope is to outwit all the challenges, all opposition, get it through Parliament, pass it through the Lords, where it will wind up before the Wef King himself, Charles, whose job it is to give it royal assent and pass it into law. And they're looking at spring 2024 to complete it by. So what are we dealing with here, and why does it matter? Well, the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill would amend existing data protection legislation and introduce new provisions in areas such as digital verification services and smart data. We are talking about a widespread use of your personal data coming together under a digital sphere and with the use of AI technology. But first, let's outline a little bit about our current GDPR, or to give it its long title, the General Data Protection Regulation. Now, the GDPR is considered to be one of the strongest privacy laws in the world. It was drafted and passed by the European Parliament in 2018, but it covers organisations anywhere that collect data related to people in the EU. Well, now we're not in the EU anymore, so where does that leave us? Well, more of that as we progress. Failure to comply with the GDPR can result in significant fines against those who violate these privacy standards. It is also, of course, open to abuse. More lawyers are noting that it is being used in defamation cases, and as it remains a developing area of law, the boundaries of how it can be used are still being tested. What is clear, however, is the right to privacy is part of the 1950 European Convention of Human Rights, which states, everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home, and his correspondence. From this basis, the EU has sought to ensure the protection of this right through legislation. Obviously, advanced technology such as the internet has increased the need for modern protections for people's privacy. And in 1991, the European Data Protection Directive was established. This was to enable member states to implement their own laws regarding data collection and use. The internet, as we know, is gluttonous about people's data, and places like Facebook, for example, were proving somewhat harder to control, and work commenced to update the 1995 agreement. Thus, the GDPR came to be in 2018, and all organizations that gathered data were required to be compliant with it. Which brings us to the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. It is the latest and much more advanced, more totalitarian stage of the journey. Some of the key changes to note are the revisions to definition, including personal data, which is clarifying what identifiable means, purpose limitation, clarifying purposes for future processing, and research. This is about scientific research and can cover all manner of ills that people need to be aware of. Remember how they introduced medical tyranny during C19 for the greater good? Now you're getting an idea. So the DPDI's next stage of its journey to law is this week in the House of Lords, so we have work to do. The House of Lords so far has been fairly robust, challenging it, but politicians, including government and so-called opposition, are absolutely in favour of this. Last week, one Lord cited the Poor Law in relation to Charles Dickens when talking about parts of this bill and what it is intended for. The minister responsible for it is Michelle Donnellan. She is the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. She was previously appointed Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. Of course, Donnellan's name is on the bill, but we all know she's not the one responsible for this. This bill is about changing the very face of our lives, and with the government holding us to ransom in every area should we fail to comply. Someone once quipped that Orwell's 1984 was not supposed to be an instruction manual, and I get that. So here's how the government's selling this bill. It's being sold on this idea that it is simplifying the use of data in order to be able to be a better society with better scientific studies for the good of humanity. The bill says it allows the country, in quotes, to realise new post-Brexit freedoms. It does this by pushing the bits that we all want to hear: how to have less nuisance calls, how to stop online fraud, how to advance medicine and technology, again, for the greater good of humanity. And none more so than when it was mentioned recently during the King's speech. Now, the King's speech, his first one, opens a new term in Parliament and sets out what government aimed to achieve during that time. The fact that it was mentioned at all tells us, as one expert told me, that this is an exalted new bill. There is no doubt that this is a priority for the sitting government. After all, who better to head it up than a Prime Minister who is a former banker and whose marital wealth comes from Infosys, a leading tech digital company. This is certainly one of the reasons why Rishi Sunak has been put in place. Remember, we didn't vote him in to be Prime Minister. He was put into that position. And that was without a public vote and by the shadowy hands that operate in Parliament, moving prime ministers around like pieces on a chessboard, because that is what they are. If you look on the government website, you will see what they want the public to believe about this bill, and it's mentioned in the King's speech. Let me quote some of it. To quote, the King's speech also made reference to the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, which will see tougher punishments for those who pester people with unwanted calls and messages. In 2022, there were around 59,800 reports of nuisance communications made to the Information Commissioner, but these new measures are expected to slash the number of calls being made. The bill sets out a common sense data laws that will give organisations greater flexibility to protect personal data while maintaining high data protection standards. The legal changes will improve the UK's ability to strike international data deals and make these partnerships more secure, allowing British businesses to seize billions of pounds of data trade as a reward of Brexit. The reforms to UK data laws also aim to reduce the number of consent pop-ups people see online, which repeatedly ask users to give permission for websites to collect data about their visits. The bill will also make it easier and quicker for people to verify their identity digitally if they want to, reducing the need to carry around ID such as passports and driver's licenses by establishing a framework for the use of trusted and secure digital verification services. Let's be real here. This is their long dreamed of digital ID scheme, and it's edging ever closer. Once that is completely in place, it can work well with their central bank digital currency, which is also well underway. Once we have that, cash will be phased out and we will be in trouble, which is why we need to act now. The reality is we can change the way it looks, but it's almost certainly going through in one form or another. But as you know, knowledge is power, and what we must do is water it down so that it cannot impinge on our lives in the way they want it to. UK Parliament, aware that there will be public pushback if people know what this bill is really about, are quick to put front and centre the stuff that will make us go, oh yes, let me have some of that, as they have done in the King's speech. Well, if you're watching this, the chances are you are already savvy enough to know that the government is not serving us, they are serving others, and it is not the people. So let's look at the stuff the government is not using as part of its public relations drive to get people on board. Let's start with the one that has been perhaps most controversial, and that is spying on people's bank accounts. This will enable banks and financial institutions to be given the power to monitor anyone receiving any form of welfare payments. No permission from a court for such egregiously intrusive behaviour would be required, and you won't even be told it's happening, and neither does there need to be any prior suspicion of you. It can just happen with no reason why. Now, the thing is, you may say, well, I'm not on benefits, doesn't bother me. Do you think it's just going to stop there at people receiving benefits? And bear in mind, we are talking about people who are some of the most vulnerable amongst us: sick, disabled, single parents. These are the people they want to monitor. Further, the bill enables politicians to make changes without even a vote in Parliament. This is the world they want us to be governed by. So as I say, if you think it's going to stop at the sick and disabled, think again, right? Once they get this through, they can change it however they want to. The thing about the bank accounts that they're interested in having monitored is not only the usual stuff of demonizing those who are impoverished, but about controlling their every move. Because you see, it's not enough to be sick and disabled and impoverished in this country. Our government also wants to trample all over you and let you know that you're down there. And they can do that, right? The monitoring of the bank account is about looking for unusual activity beyond the usual benefit payments into the account. But what if someone is gifted money, for example, as I have been in the past as a single parent when my child was very young and I was receiving working tax credit? My siblings frequently helped me. So that would then be flagged up as fraudulent. And goodness knows where that would lead to. Thing is, this area is already suitably covered in law, where accounts can be inspected by a court order when there are real concerns of fraud. It doesn't need to be freely available to every Tom, Dick and Sally who can have a gander at it. Are MPs' bank accounts being monitored for the money they receive from outside interests? Of course not. What about bankers who we have historically had to bail out because of dodgy dealings? No, they are fine too, despite the fact that there's every chance that MPs and bankers are far more fraudulent and problematic than someone struggling to survive on benefits. There will be no such monitoring for their accounts. This part of the bill is absolutely an attack on the less well-off, and we should fight it on those grounds alone. In fact, the Equality and Human Rights Commission advice on the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill have many concerns and recommend the removal of this clause. And let me read part of it. It says, the Secretary of State has said that only a minimum amount of data will be accessed and only in instances which show a potential risk of fraud and error. However, given there is already a power to investigate where there is a suspicion of fraud, as I said, We are concerned that this clause may lead to unnecessary and disproportionate checks on the bank accounts of benefit claimants, disproportionately impacting people with certain protected characteristics, including disabled people. We share concerns raised by others that this data could easily be misinterpreted and benefit sanctions incorrectly imposed on vulnerable people in need of support. Now, there is a cautionary tale here. This will expose millions of people to the risk of being unjustly accused of fraud and incorrectly having benefits stopped. And we need to look at what has already happened to 20,000 families in the Netherlands in 2021, when there was an absolute scandal because tax officials had wrongly accused thousands of parents of fraud, plunging many families into horrific debt by ordering them to repay childcare allowances. And it was like they were literally hunting down completely innocent families. Now, if you've ever had to make ends meet, then you'll know what it means if there's suddenly a glitch in the system and you don't receive that money that you're relying on. It is horrendous. We should be very clear about it, because this sort of behavior makes, as it was said in the Netherlands, the government an enemy of its people. But there is much more, so let's explore that. A particularly nasty part of this bill is the plan to make it extremely hard for people to find out what information is being held about them by agencies. So imagine your bank account is being monitored and you can't even find out about it. Things like freedom of information and subject access requests can be dismissed as vexatious and excessive much more easily than they can at the moment. That's troubling, and we should all be troubled by it. I have a personal experience here that I want to tell you about, because some of us have already experienced what it's like to be under surveillance. And this is what I discovered that was happening to me when I put in a subject access request. It turns out that the so-called 77th Brigade, which is attached to the British military and the government's cabinet office at number 10, has been spying on me for at least 2+ years and possibly more. This was allowed because they were apparently monitoring me for disinformation. This is outrageous. My work is evidence-based, but imagine if I couldn't access this, couldn't know what they were doing under the guise of national security. The new bill seeks to keep people in the dark. They want to be able to infringe on our rights and our privacy and demonize us as problematic, even fraudulent to the system, and for us not to be able to know anything about it. Are you getting an idea yet when I say that this is the most excessive step towards a surveillance society that I have seen in 3 decades of being a journalist? Let me tell you more, because there is so much more here that we need to explore. This bill will also give increased police power. The police will have new authority to access personal data with the intent of apprehending suspected individuals. Again, that sounds like something that will help with law enforcement, but I can tell you they have been trying to do this for well over a decade, and it is for nefarious reasons. I recall having a verbal fight on BBC Radio 5 Live with former Conservative Minister Edwina Currie. She was of the mindset that if you haven't got anything to hide, why is it a problem? And I'll tell you why, because my privacy is none of your damn business, Edwina. I said it then, and I'll say it again now to anybody else who is of that same mindset. The fact is, who will decide what is right and appropriate about snooping on me or anybody else, right? Privacy is a right that we have enshrined in many human rights laws. No wonder they want to get rid of the ECHR as well. So the increased police power is hitting us from all angles at the moment, but also with the new proposed criminal justice bill, which will see the police have more power against us than ever before. It is proposed that the police will be able to enter our homes without a warrant and without prior reason, but just a suspicion, and they will be able to seize our equipment. That is troubling. That is a scary and totalitarian new future that we have to fight against, because what they are setting us up to be is the UK to be the foremost nation, and it will set a precedent for others to follow. The fact is, this bill is determined to do away with structures, boundaries, and due process that are designed to protect us. A good example of this is the abolition of the Office of Commissioner for the Retention and Use of Biometric Material. Now, let me break that down. This is the office that is responsible for data such as fingerprints and our DNA. I mean, think about it. These are some of the most personal aspects of who we are. The idea of actually removing such an office naturally lends to the question of how will such data not only be stored, but how will it be protected and thus used against us? There again, politicians with this bill leave the rest of us open to misuse and overreach. Without a body that is regulating and overseeing such personal material, this data is absolutely open to abuse, which, given our DNA and fingerprints, is personal to us on an individual level. One must wonder what they intend to do with it and for what. If this is not a perfect example of the potential for intrusive surveillance, I don't know what is. Talking about which, they want to remove specific requirements governing CCTV. We are already one of the most spied upon nations in the world, and they want to remove the safeguarding aspects around it. This can have catastrophic consequences for us. With no clear regulation, the ability to snoop on us en masse and without clear guidelines is clearly open to abuse. Plus, there has been a systematic failure of CCTV in places where it should have been working. Remember when there was a death of a policeman outside Parliament? CCTV was missing. How interesting that was. This has happened before when it actually matters. This is almost certainly about mass snooping on me and on you, without boundaries, without regulation, without the protection that we are currently afforded. Listen, there are some good people and organizations who are following this debate and campaigning against it. I recommend grassroots organizations like Save Our Rights. I've interviewed people from there before, and they understand the importance of protecting individual liberty from government overreach. So this is what we have here. There are areas of this bill that scare the living daylights out of me. As one example, in Schedule 2, processing to be treated as compatible with original purpose. So let me break that down for you. So what that means is this green light personal data being repurposed for a broad range of activities, all defined in very broad and all-encompassing terms. In short, absolutely any personal data that you have agreed to, right? The source, when it was originally collected, for whatever purpose, can be lawfully repurposed. You've agreed to a pop-up on a computer, but that can be lawfully repurposed to do with medical trials. Think about it. This is really serious. At the moment, we know a lawful basis is required as well as a purpose. But what they're trying to do is redefine that, repurpose data sets that are enabled on a large scale. Because you know what? We are the commodity. They want to expand data sharing capabilities, science, vaccines. People say that this bill would rule out an NHS data grab. But if they're allowed to change it once it's passed into a law without the usual due process, who can say? You know, and also the fact is, if they repurpose your data, you will not be notified. There will be no obligation to tell you that your data is being used. How can you consent to something when you don't know it's being used? They literally want to take away our ability to consent to what is being used about us, right? So this is really scary. Let us be clear here. This bill is largely about the dilution of our privacy rights and the expansion of government overreach and investigative powers. In other words, big brother. Much of it is extremely complex, and we won't know how they will ultimately intend to use it until it's all passed into law. But by then, it will be too late. And let's be honest, do you really want to leave your safety and privacy in the hands of people who brought you COVID passports and such like, and the absolute abuse that accompanied that? We've had one warning. We shouldn't need another. So the next date in the diary is Tuesday, December the 19th, 2023, when this will be back in the House of Lords and it will be debated. Viscount Camrose, Conservative, he is the Minister for AI and Intellectual Property, will open the debate and respond on behalf of the government. Contributing members include Lord Allen of Hallam, Baroness Kidron, Lord Sicker, Lord Holmes of Richmond. Lord Sicker, in particular, is a strong opponent of this. He is absolutely challenging what he calls mass snooping and more power to his elbow. But we cannot sit back and allow these people to do the job for us. We have to get involved. Even if you see this video after December the 19th, it doesn't matter. This bill is still going through the parliamentary process. We still have time to act. So this video is a call to campaigning arms. This bill is the biggest surveillance state grab I have seen in 30 years of journalism. This is about monitoring our every move so that we become complete slaves to the system, be that through work, what we buy, what we watch, who we listen to, who we meet, what medical procedures we have, or what medical procedures they can deny us having. This is about taking over our lives in a way that the registration of our names has not been able to fully achieve. At this moment in time, as I say, we still have time to act on this, to stop this happening. There are things that can be done. Even if you are completely jaded by the political system, there is only so much they can do when people come together en masse, and we need to come together on this. Even if you can't stand your member of parliament or local lord, petition them, write to them. And you need to do this for several reasons. And one of them is we need a record of the people in parliament who have refused to act on your behalf. They work for you. Yes, they do. The more we do it, the more powerful it becomes. Legacy media is not going to help. It is in their interest to become a surveillance state because corporate journalism is still in bed with politicians, metaphorically, if not literally, and some literally. The Leveson inquiry clearly revealed the complicity, and not only has it not rectified, but it is worse than ever. We know that leading journalists, who are leading journalists because they are compliant and possibly compromised, but we know they are working with politicians and the establishment. We have to be our own media. We cannot trust them. We know what they're about. We need people to rise up. Citizen journalism has to come into its own like never before. We can do this. We have got this. Let's go to work. Just to say, this is the first video request of my patrons at Patreon. Every month, my patrons get to choose a video that they want me to make, and this is the first one. And the fact that this is as important a topic as it is absolute credit to my patrons for suggesting it and for voting for it. If you would like to become a patron and support my work, there is a link in the description below. Thank you to all my wonderful patrons for making this video possible and for supporting my work.